invites our ears, and to bring ourselves in song from getting here to being here. I want to welcome you to this summer gathering, an opportunity to gather in smaller circles, coming from all the circles in which we live and move and have our being, to create this one around these particular tables with each other, where we are welcome to be, whether we have been here before, whether we haven't been here in a very long time, or whether we often help shape the circles that form in this community. You are welcome whether you're in this room or whether you join us online, wherever it is that you find yourself this day. It's our hope that this might be a significant time, whoever you are, wherever you find yourself right now, as we spend this focused time with one another. And we're mindful as we gather on this Canada Day that so many of us make our home on native lands, the storied and ancestral lands of Cree peoples, traditional meeting ground and gathering place and traveling route for the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux peoples. And as we gather on this day in which some of us celebrate a nationhood that was formed only 151 years ago, we acknowledge our responsibility to mend the wounds of our history with this land's First Peoples and to be faithful treaty partners. We light this candle, a ritual that we celebrate each time we gather. A candle that is better lit with a match that hasn't been lit before. Who said you should put things back where you found them? When we light this candle, we reenact Earth's oldest ritual, the turning of our day star to give us night and day, a reminder that our life depends on light, that we turn together with each other into a new day. We turn into its hope and its possibility. We turn into the sacredness of the gift of this new day, in which we offer our praise for all that is sacred. for life itself. Here's a story for the child in all of us. It's a story called The Table Where Rich People Sit. It's written by Bird Baylor, and the images that you'll see are the artwork of Peter Parnell. If you could see us sitting here at our old, scratched-up homemade kitchen table, you'd know we're not rich. But my father's trying to tell us we are. Doesn't he notice our worn-out shoes, or that my little brother has patches on the pants he wears to first grade? And why does he think that old rattle-trap truck is parked outside our door? You can't fool me, I say. We're poor. Would rich people sit at a table like this? My mother sort of pats the table and she says, well, we're rich and we sit at it every day. Sometimes I think I'm the only one in my family who is sensible. Maybe I should mention that my parents made this table out of lumber someone else threw away. And they even had a celebration when they finished it. Now understand, I like this table. All I'm saying to you is it didn't come from any furniture store, and it just doesn't look like a table where rich people would sit. But my mother thinks if all the rulers of the world could get together at a friendly wooden table in someone's kitchen, they would solve all their arguments in half the time. And my father says it wouldn't hurt To have a lot of cookies piled up on a nice blue plate that everyone could reach without asking. But tonight, it's our kitchen, and our argument, and our family meeting, and our very spicy ginger cookies piled up on my mother's one good blue flowered plate exactly in the center of the table. I'm the one who called this meeting, and the subject is money. And I say, we don't have enough of it. I tell my parents that they should both get better jobs so we could buy a lot of nice new things. I tell them I look worse than anyone at school. I hate to bring this up, I say, but it would help if you both had a little more ambition. They look surprised. You can see they never think about the things we need. Right here. I might as well admit it that my parents have a very strange idea about working. They think the only jobs worth having are outdoors. They want cliffs or canyons or desert or mountains around them whenever they work. They even want a good view of the sky. They always work together, and their favorite thing is panning gold, piling us into that beat-up truck and heading for the rocky desert hills, or back in some narrow mountain gully where the roads are just coyote trails. I love to walk the wide canyons, the dry stream beds where the little flecks of gold are found. They used to tell us the truck just knew what roads to take, and the coyotes showed them where to look for gold. But I never did believe it. After a month or two out there, they always had a little bit of gold to sell, but you can tell it never made them rich. As far as I can see, it was just an excuse to camp in some beautiful wild place again. So now, of course, my dad's asking, how many people are as lucky as we are? But I've called this meeting and I say, I bet you could make more money working in a building somewhere in town. Remember our number one rule, he says. We have to see the sky. You could look through a window, I say. But they won't even think about it. Do you see what I mean about being the only sensible one in my family? Finally, my mother says, all right, mountain girl. We're going to explain to you how we figure our money. You be the bookkeeper tonight. She hands us each a pencil and some yellow paper, and she gives my brother some too, and he'll just sit there pretending to write. He'll really draw people dancing in the sky. And by the way, my name's not really Mountain Girl. They call me that because I was born in a cabin on the side of the mountain where they were looking for gold one summertime in Arizona. They say it was the most magical place, the most beautiful mountain they ever climbed. Maybe it was, but you already know how those two exaggerate. Anyway, they wanted my first sight to be that mountainside. So they held me up outdoors at sunrise when I was just about 8 minutes old. The truth is, I still like sunrise quite a lot. And my little brother, they call him Ocean Boy. They said, since I already had the best mountain for my first sight, they thought they ought to find the most beautiful ocean for him. I think they went all over Mexico looking for a place where the ocean touches jungle. And they had to find a certain kind of purple-blue night sky and the exact green waves they like. Then they held him to see those waves as his first sight. Someday we're all going back to his green ocean and my high mountain, but for now, even though they claim we're so rich, they can't take us anywhere at all. No wonder I had to call this meeting about money. Can you believe my father's still sitting here looking me straight in the eye and saying, "But Mountain Girl, I thought you knew how rich we are." I say, we can't get very far in this discussion if you won't even admit we're poor. I'll prove it to you right now, he said. Let's make a list of the money we earn in a year. How much is that? I say, I'll write it down. But he says, not so fast. We have a lot of things to think about before we add them up. What kinds of things? My mother says, we don't just take our pay in cash, you know. We have a special plan to get paid in sunrises, too, and in having time to hike around the canyons and look for eagle nests. But I say, can you just give me one single number I can write down? So we start with $20,000. That's how much my father says it's worth to him to work outdoors where he can see the sky all day and feel the wind and smell the rain an hour before it's even really raining. He says it's worth that much to be anywhere, where if he feels like singing, he can sing out loud and no one will mind. I've just written down $20,000 when my mother says, you better make that $30,000 because it's worth at least another 10 to hear the coyotes howling back in the hills. So I write $30,000. Then she remembers that she likes to see long distances in faraway mountains change colors about 10 times a day. That's worth another $5,000 to me, she says. I'm not surprised. Because my mother claims to be an expert in mountain shadows in the desert, she says that she can tell the time by the way those colors change from dawn to dusk. I scratch out what I had and I write $35,000. My father thinks of something else. When a cactus blooms, you should be there to watch it because it might be a color you won't see again any day in your life. How much do you think that color's worth? 50 cents, my brother says. But they decide on another $5,000, so now I write $40,000. But I'd forgotten how much my father likes to make bird sounds. He can copy any bird, but he's best at the white-winged doves and the ravens and the red-tailed hawks and quail. He's really good at eagles, too, and horned owls. So, of course, he has to add another $10,000 for having both day birds and night birds around us. So I cross out what I write, and I put $50,000. And my mother says, well, let's see what our mountain girl is worth to us. I'm beginning to catch on to their kind of thinking, so I suggest I'm worth $10,000, even though my little brother's begun to laugh. Don't underestimate yourself, my father says. Remember all those good lists you make for us. He's right, I do. I made a list of the best books each one of us has read and a list of all the ones we want to read again. I also made a list of all the animals each one of us has seen and the ones we still want to see. In the wild, not in a zoo. Mine's a mountain lion. I've dreamed of him 4 times and I've already seen his track. My father chooses a grizzly bear. My mother wants to see a wolf and hear it call, and my little brother can't decide between a dolphin and a whale. I remember every one because I make the lists. They end up deciding I'm worth about $1 million. I say I don't think I am, but I write it down anyways. In fact, it turns out that every one of us is worth $1 million, so we have $4,050,000. Then I realize I want to add $5,000 myself for the pleasure of wandering in the open country alone, just as free as a lizard, not following trails, not having a plan, just turning whatever way the wind turns me. They say that's certainly worth $5,000, so that makes $4,055,000. Finally, my brother says to put down $7 more for all the nights we get to sleep outside under the stars. We all say $7 doesn't seem like enough. We talk him into making it $5,000. Now my paper says $4,060,000, and we haven't even started counting actual cash. To tell the truth, the cash part doesn't seem to matter so much anymore. I suggest it shouldn't even be on our list of our kind of riches. So, the meeting's over. The rest of them have gone outside to see the new sliver of moon. But I'm sitting here at our nice homemade kitchen table with one cookie left on my mother's good blue flowered plate. And I'm writing this book about us. And I kind of pat the table, and I'm glad it's ours. In fact, I'm thinking that the title of my book should be The Table Where Rich People Sit. These are the words of Catherine Osmond in her recent book, Grace Without God. In a chapter on ritual, she says this: ritual is how we mark time and make meaning. Rituals celebrate the milestones of our lives, birth and birthdays, coming of age, marriage, promotion, retirement, and death. Collective rituals provide vessels for human emotions, public spaces for the formalized expression of values, practices for working through difficult passages and transitions. Rituals force us to forget ourselves and give ourselves over to practices meant to knit people together into a common identity. They are how we make the invisible visible, even more directly than with words. The year I started asking about what our Christmas tree meant to me, my husband Michael was out of town on the first night of Hanukkah. Nearly every year, Hanukkah would sneak up on us and we'd scramble to dig out the menorah boxed in the attic and find candles that fit. Some years we were lucky enough, if we got our act together, for the candle lighting to happen by the third or fourth night. That year I wanted to try to do better. Even though Michael, our main source of Jewish knowledge, wasn't home, I decided to hold the lighting ceremony that night after dinner. I would blend what we had: a dazzling Christmas tree in the corner, a trio of secular kids, and our routine dinner of pasta and chicken nuggets into some sort of ritual. So that afternoon I found the menorah and placed it in the center of the dining room table. I Googled Hanukkah candle lighting prayer and sent the page to the printer. After the kids came home, the two oldest finished their homework, the four of us ate dinner, and I allowed the two older kids to light the shamash and then the first candle. I watched as they lit the candles reverently. Once the tiny flames were rising, I said, "Great job," as if that were that. End of story. And I got up to go wash the dishes. "Wait," my son said, "what about the prayer?" "Oh, right," I said, "I left it in the printer." My oldest daughter said she'd go find it for us. She bolted downstairs and reemerged with the printed page, clutched carefully in her hands as if she were bearing a Dead Sea Scroll. She handed it to her brother and began to read the words in Hebrew, straining to mimic what he took to be the correct inflection. My desire to rush through our nightly routine suddenly changed. I was surprised to find myself fighting back tears. I had to put the pieces in place, but my children were the ones taking the ritual most seriously. They seemed to crave it even. As my son read, the other two sat perfectly still. I saw they were giving an ancient practice new life. I realized how much they wanted this feeling of togetherness within a sacred practice. It's just that no one had shown them how. No great sage of Judaism would have imagined it like this. The four of us sitting around our dining room table, an enormous Christmas tree laden with lights and ornaments just 10 feet away, our son botching the Hebrew words that were laser printed into a recycled sheet of paper, on the back of which was printed a recipe for corn salsa. But we were as clueless as foreigners in a new country. Our ritual would surely be laughable to many people, and yet it seemed magical to me. There we were, feeling our way as best we could through this thing we didn't really understand but felt compelled to enact. All three children, even our rambunctious 2-year-old, fell into a deep silence as we listened to the prayer. The air stilled, and for the first time all day, we took a collective breath. I felt closer to my children and my husband's parents, long deceased. I felt how much I treasured our family's blend of old and new. This is part of what ritual gives people, these structured moments to connect with one another and ourselves. In the thoughts of this seeker,
These are the words of Ian Lawton. We all have stories and a lineage. Our memories are built on these stories that are part fact and part fiction. It's not so much that we retrieve memories. We reweave memories in a way that feels consistent. Many of our rituals and traditions are built on these memories. And there's an old Jewish story that makes this point. When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov felt anxious about the future, he went to a special place in the forest to meditate. He would light the fire, say a special prayer, and sure enough, his anxiety would subside. Sometimes amazing things would happen after the forest ritual. Years later, when he was gone, it fell to the next generation to deal with the same anxiety. The head rabbi knew the story of his ancestor in the forest, but he didn't know all the details. He knew where to go in the forest and even knew the words of the prayer, but he didn't remember how to light the fire. So he would go to the same place in the forest and say, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer. And sure enough, his anxiety would subside. Another generation later, the same ritual would take place, but with even less memory of the details. The rabbi would go into the forest and say, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not remember the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. It was always enough. The years passed. Finally, the next generation, the head rabbi, only had a very small knowledge of the ritual. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he said, "I'm unable to light the fire, and I do not remember the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient." Telling the stories from the past with the mingling of fact and fiction is important. Ritual and memory are like that. When I was growing up, our family had a Christmas ritual that we inherited from an English custom. Christmas pudding, steamed and served with brandy, butter, and cream. The earlier custom was to include certain items in the pudding before cooking it. Silver coins for wealth, tiny wishbones for good luck, a ring for marriage, and so on. Whoever found the items in their pudding on Christmas Day would get what they chomped on. When I was young, my parents would put coins in the pudding that they had collected from their parents, shillings and the sixpence and the like. The coins must have gone missing because by the time I was about 10, they were using current day coins. Then when people started losing teeth on their Christmas pudding, we stopped putting coins in the pudding altogether. But we still ate the pudding, and the brandy butter endures to this day, just like the story of the rabbis eating the pudding and telling stories about the coins of Christmas past was always enough. Tradition, ritual, and memory are based on ever-changing story. In the thoughts of this seeker, may we find wisdom.
We are ritual-making creatures. We've been hearing in these readings some rituals people practice in their lives. Many of our rituals are not particularly religious or spiritual in their nature. It might be the sacrament of the coffee cup in the morning. It might be the way we string the Christmas lights and always play the same piece of music each year when we do that. But I want to invite us into a moment of conversation around the table. Conversations need speakers and listeners. You're welcome to be either one or both, but not at the same time. We want to take just a few moments to share with each other a ritual that we practice in our lives, and you're, as always, welcome to pass it on to the next person and just share your name with the circle. But we want to just take a few moments to share with each other a ritual that we might practice in our day or in our year or in our families or wherever. So let's go. Back to the circle of the whole.
There is a ritual recorded in the Jewish scriptures. Now the festival of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us, that we may eat it together." Well, they asked him, "Where do you want us to make preparations for this?" "Listen," he said to them, "when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples. And the owner will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Make preparations for us there." So they went and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When the hour had come, Jesus took his place at the table, and the disciples with him. And he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I die." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves." Then he took the loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them. In this story, passed down to us from the 1st century, may we find wisdom for our living.
Whether we think of ourselves as religious or secular or spiritual, and whatever our ethnic or cultural heritage, we express something of our search for meaning in our need for symbols and for ceremony, for ritual and reenactment. Whether it's rings and vows, or parchments and processions, cap and gown, fasts and feasts, sundance and sweats, pouring water or passing a peace pipe. We have found ways to reinforce the memory that life itself is a sacrament, a sacred thing. We've found ways to express our deepest longings by infusing something very ordinary like bread and juice, like smoke and water. Something very ordinary with something more in a ritualized moment. Like the generation of those rabbis Ian read about, addressing their anxiety about the future in a forest ritual. A ritual that evolved and changed over time. Or a young girl addressing her anxiety about their family not having enough in a unique accounting ritual around a homemade kitchen table. Or a family searching for a way to blend their Jewish and Christian heritage, even as those who no longer believe the tenets of those traditions, but are still nourished by its rituals. We find ourselves creating the rituals we need to mark our passages through time, to honor our turnings and our learnings. And maybe that's one of the ways to understand that story Charles just read to us a moment about. To understand what's going on in that story, that we inherit it in multiple ways from an early community of those following the way of Jesus. It is a story that is set in an anxious time when the writing is on the wall. The religious and the political authorities are conspiring to suppress those who would subvert or oppose the agenda of the empire with aspirations for a different way, a different economy, a different power structure, an ethic of mutuality and fairness, even as the emperor's army moves into their beloved city. First-century Jews are preparing to celebrate an ancient feast. A table would be set in each home with symbolic foods to remember and reenact their primal narrative, their founding story, their liberation from an earlier empire. Each year, this Passover feast is celebrated to recreate a story of finding freedom from Pharaoh's empire and crossing through a sea to journey to a new land where they'd no longer be oppressed or enslaved. Years later, as some remembered celebrating that last Passover with their leader before he was executed, the friends of Jesus began to remodel their feast, to remember their teacher. They had staked their hopes on his radical message. They had trusted that he would be the one to raise up the resistance or lead the charge that would free them from Rome and rule and from the corruption of their temple authorities. And now, over the intervening decades from his death until the time these stories are given shape and written down, these stories of his final days have evolved, and this ritual of Passover was being reshaped as a way of reviving their dreams for freedom nourished by the teachings of their leader. When they shared the symbolic foods of that ancient liberation, they revived the dream of living as if that beloved community had already come into being. Over the centuries, we have molded their way of strengthening their intention to live as though the kingdom of God, the beloved community of Jesus, had already come. We've remodeled it into a ceremony they likely wouldn't even recognize. In just the same way that the later generations of rabbis wouldn't have recognized that forest ritual that had evolved into an elaborate story, as is the work of every generation, we have reshaped and revisioned the rituals and the traditions we have inherited in the Christian household to meet us where we are now, in the world we inhabit now. Stories and symbols evolve. But whenever and however we pause to infuse our experiences and our aspirations in life with meaning, we're practicing. We're practicing living in the way that we want to live in the world. We're practicing giving our intention, expressing our gratitude, acknowledging our wonder and awe, the holiness of time and space. We're practicing as though the world we hoped for was already here, that the kingdom had come and we're here to welcome it. Rituals give us a safe and a spacious place, a laboratory, if you like, to practice how to live as if everything were sacred, beyond any dollar value we can give it, and worthy of our deep attention and our best intention. So we come today celebrating a ritual long celebrated in our tradition, asking ourselves and one another what symbols we need in our time, or what might be the name of the bread for which we live, what might be the name of the cup we yearn to share with one another. We pause in the gift of music to think about these questions. Tables are places of intimacy, places for honest conversation, places for our deepest questions, places to be real, because it's hard to be anybody but yourself when you've got butter on your chin or jam on your nose. We gather at a table with simple symbols, at a table in our tradition that has had so many different names. For some of us, it has been known as the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper, the emphasis on the syllable of memorial. It's mostly a memorial meal, a time and a place where memory reaches back to recall the last moments that a community gathered with someone they loved. For others, this ritual has been called Eucharist, a feast of thanksgiving, a time and a place to celebrate the gifts of life, an opportunity to find bread for the journey and wine for our spirit's joy. For others in the Christian household, this ritual has been called Mass, a place where a sacrifice ends worship and service begins. It takes its name from the Latin words that conclude the liturgy, which is to say, go, this is your mission. For others in the Christian household, this table has been called communion, a place to come home, home's where the table is, a place to gather to eat and drink with friends, a place to know and be known, to meet where we need not just food and drink, but we hunger and thirst for the world as we would wish and hope and love it to be. We come to this ritual with its many names, and we have different relationships and experiences of this ritual in our lives. For some, it has been a meaningful practice. For others, it has been barriered with symbols and language that has made it impossible to participate in a meaningful way. We all have different experiences of how we come to share bread and a cup with one another. So I want to invite us into one more conversation, to say something with each other, if we are comfortable to do so, about our own particular experience of this ritual, perhaps as we've experienced it over the course of our lives or as we experience it now. And always feel welcome to be a listener and to let the question pass to another person at the table. This is just an opportunity for us to enter into conversation if we choose, to listen to one another's experience, or to be reflective and take this time as we need it to be. So we'll pause for a few moments to have this time of conversation and invite those who are joining us online to either have a conversation if they're gathered with others, or to take this time to reflect on this question, and we'll be back together in just a few moments. All of these conversations can be continued, and they are rich and important conversations. I want to invite us to take a moment to sing together a new song that revisions the table for us. We create this ritual with one another. And so I invite us to serve one another at these tables where we're seated, an opportunity to pass the bread to the person beside you as it makes its way around the table, followed by the cup into which the bread can be dipped, and your invitation to offer any words you choose or no words at all. It might be, for the neighbor you serve, the bread of hope you offer. It might be bread of comfort, bread of courage, bread for your journey. It might be the cup of community, the cup of justice, the cup of possibility, the cup of commitment, the cup of quest. Whatever words, or if no words come, we share these gifts around the table with one another. And so we take this time to serve one another gifts of bread, gifts of juice. Friends, we take the light of life that is within us, nourished by the rituals we share in our lives. We take that light wherever we go, and we seek the light that we find in one another. We seek the light that we find in traditions old and new. We go, shaping the world into tables, a world bent on building walls. We go in peace and in the strength of who we are together.
Christ.